Chuck Norris sat in the crowded auditorium of a Midwestern American civic center. The air permeated with the scent of lacquered wooden floors and freshly brewed coffee wafting from the foyer. The hall was modestly decorated, yet with respect. American flags swayed gently in the breeze from the air conditioners, and a large screen on stage displayed the words, "Honoring Our Heroes, a tribute to veterans." Today, his son Mike, age 32, was to receive an award for bravery during his service in Afghanistan, a medal for saving a comrade under fire. Chuck, a man with silver at his temples but a posture that still hinted at his legendary fighter days, sat in the third row, his hands resting on his knees. His sharp, attentive eyes followed the stage, where an MC in a formal suit read out the names of veterans. The room buzzed with the whispers of family and friends gathered to honor the heroes. Chuck felt a mix of pride and faint unease. Mike had never liked the spotlight, and Chuck knew his son had agreed to this ceremony only out of respect for his comrades. The hall carried a blend of perfumes and damp autumn air seeping through the open doors. Outside, gray clouds promised rain, while inside, snippets of conversation floated about politics, taxes, and recent protests in the city over cuts to veterans' benefits. "They promise support, then slash the funding," grumbled an older man nearby. "These politicians just use our kids for their campaigns," whispered another woman. These words resonated with Chuck's own thoughts, as he had long felt disillusioned with a system that often betrayed those who served it. The ceremony began with the national anthem, and the room stood, hands over hearts. Chuck felt his chest tighten with memories, not of his own acting or fighting career, but of Mike, who as a boy had dreamed of being like his father yet chose a harder, more challenging path. After the anthem, the MC began calling veterans to the stage, each step echoing loudly in the hall. Mike was fifth on the list. Chuck noticed his son, dressed in a dark blue suit, nervously adjusting his tie while sitting in the front row. Mike hated formal events, and Chuck knew he felt uncomfortable under dozens of gazes. But when Mike's name was announced, the room erupted in applause, and Chuck felt pride warm his chest. Mike rose, his shoulders tense, but his stride confident like a soldier's. The MC recounted a brief story of his heroism, saving a comrade under fire, and the room buzzed with applause again. Suddenly, Chuck's attention was drawn to two burly security guards in black suits, approaching him from either side. Their faces were stony, their movements sharp, like those of men unaccustomed to defiance. The taller one, with a scar above his eyebrow, leaned toward Chuck and said quietly but firmly, "Sir, you need to come with us." Chuck frowned, his brows knitting over eyes that still held their edge. "What nonsense," he thought, but he replied calmly, "You've got the wrong guy. I'm here for my son." The guard grabbed his elbow and repeated, "Come with us now." The commanding tone ignited an anger in Chuck that he had long learned to control. The room continued applauding Mike, who now stood on stage holding his medal, but Chuck felt blood rush to his temples. He yanked his arm free and hissed, "Don't touch me. Tell me what this is about." The younger guard, with a nervous look, stepped closer, his hand resting on the radio clipped to his belt. "Sir, don't make this difficult. We have orders. You need to leave the hall." Chuck felt his muscles tense, his heart beating faster. He wasn't the Chuck Norris of the movies, tossing enemies aside, but at 84, he still carried a strength forged by years of training. He stood up, his height and posture making the guards pause for a moment. "I'm not going anywhere until you explain what's happening," he said louder than intended, and several heads in nearby rows turned toward him. Mike on stage noticed the commotion, his eyes narrowing as he saw the guards surrounding his father. Tension rose in the room like a storm brewing. Chuck felt the stares, not just from the guards but from the people around, who began whispering. "That's Chuck Norris," he heard someone say, but it didn't help. The taller guard grabbed his arm again, this time more forcefully, and pulled toward the aisle. Chuck instinctively twisted free, his fist clenching, and in a moment of unchecked anger, he struck the guard in the stomach. Not hard, but enough to make him double over and step back, gasping for air. The room gasped. The second guard instantly grabbed Chuck's shoulders, trying to hold him, but Chuck, though older, was quicker. He shoved him back, and at that moment, Mike leaped off the stage, tossing his medal onto the table. "Hey, what are you doing?" he shouted, pushing through the crowd. His voice trembled with anger but carried fear. Fear for his father, for a situation spiraling out of control. The room froze, applause fading, and now all eyes were on the scene. Chuck, his face flushed, stood between the two guards, while Mike, still in his suit, tried to pull them apart. "Calm down, this is my father," Mike yelled, shoving the younger guard aside. The MC on stage froze, unsure what to do, and people in the audience began pulling out phones to record the incident. Chuck felt his anger mix with shame. He hadn't wanted this, hadn't wanted to ruin his son's moment. But something about this situation felt deeply wrong. The taller guard, clutching his stomach, finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Sir, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. We mistook you for someone else." Chuck froze, his fists still clenched. "A mistake?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. The guard nodded, his face reddening. "We were told about a suspicious person. Your description matched." "I apologize," Mike, still standing between his father and the guards, spun toward them. "You're serious? You dragged my father out without checking who he was?" The room hummed with whispers, and Chuck felt his heart tighten with humiliation. He, a man respected for decades, stood in the middle of the hall like some trespasser, while his son, just honored for heroism, was forced to defend him before everyone. The guards backed off, repeating their apologies, and the ceremony slowly resumed. Mike returned to the stage to finish his speech, but his voice sounded strained, his gaze frequently darting back to his father. Chuck sat down, but his mind buzzed like a swarm of bees. He felt the stares, some sympathetic, some curious, as if he were part of a show. The scent of coffee mingled with a metallic taste in his mouth, and the sound of applause seemed muffled, as if coming from underwater. He didn't listen to Mike's speech. His thoughts revolved around what had happened. A mistake, they said, but Chuck didn't believe in coincidences. Questions swirled in his mind. Who gave the guards the order? Why him? Was it tied to his public statements supporting veterans and criticizing government programs? Or perhaps someone among the organizers had personal motives? Chuck knew he wasn't the invincible hero of his films anymore, but his fighter's instincts told him something was off. He noticed one of the organizers, a man in an expensive suit with a event coordinator badge, nervously whispering to the guards near the exit. Their glances kept sliding toward Chuck, fueling his suspicion further. The ceremony ended, and people began to disperse, but Chuck remained seated, his hands gripping the armrests. Mike approached, his face pale but trying to smile. "Dad, let's go, it's not worth it," he said quietly. Chuck shook his head. "This isn't just a mistake, Mike. I feel it," he replied, his voice low and resolute. Mike sighed, knowing that when his father set his mind to something, stopping him was impossible. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Chuck looked at his son, his eyes gleaming. "Talk to those who need to answer." After the ceremony, as the crowd thinned and the hall emptied, a young journalist from a local news channel approached Chuck. Her camera was already rolling, and she held a microphone toward him. "Mr. Norris, I'm with News 5. Can you comment on the incident that occurred during the ceremony?" she asked, her voice professional, but her eyes betraying curiosity. Chuck looked straight into the camera, his jaw tightening. He knew his words could have consequences, but staying silent wasn't in his nature. "Today, I came to support my son, a hero who risked his life for others. But instead of respect, I was humiliated by people who didn't even bother to check who they were dealing with. This isn't just a mistake. It's an example of how the system treats those who protect it and their families. I'm disappointed not just in the guards, but in those behind them, who allow such mistakes to happen. We deserve better. Our veterans deserve better." His voice was firm yet calm, each word landing like a stone in still water. The journalist nodded, her eyes widening, but she quickly composed herself. "Do you plan any actions following this?" she asked. Chuck glanced at Mike, who stood nearby holding his medal. "I won't let this happen to someone else," he replied. "This is just the beginning." When the camera shut off and the journalist thanked him before leaving, Chuck felt the tension in his chest ease slightly. He looked at Mike, who stood quietly, staring at his medal. "You did great up there on stage," Chuck said, trying to steer the conversation back to his son. Mike smiled, but his eyes were sad. "I just wanted this day to be about us, not this," he replied softly. Chuck placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It was about you,